Hello, welcome back for another video. Today we are going to be discussing something that is a very hot topic right now. I was reading tons of Reddit threads just before this, and there's lots of stories, lots of people's with opinion. This kind of topic has been discussed on the Today Show, on basically every news outlet that's out there. I see it all over the place. People are fatigued by it. They are angry by it. They are, sympathetic about it. There's a lot of emotions attached to this. And I am talking about modern day tipping culture. That's right. We are going to talk about tipping, the history of tipping, how it all came about, what some of the frustrations are that are out there about it, and also what can you do to make sure that you're not over tipping all the time and ruining your goals and ruining your budget to get to your financial independence, because we all have our own financial goals. So do the people that we're tipping, right? But are we obligated to help them with their financial goals and yet sacrifice our own? That is a big question, right? That is what a lot of people are saying. And so we are going to go through all of that, hopefully give you a couple of things that you can do or put in place to make that tipping time a little less awkward, and hopefully have a little fun talking about tipping. Now, my first memories of tipping are very stressful memories, actually, and they're not mine. My mom gets very stressed when she's tipping. She always has. And she used to have, I don't remember if any of you remember this, a tipping card that she kept in her wallet, and she'd pull it out and she'd look at the amount on the tipping card, and and then there'd be like the amount of the food or the whatever we're tipping, and then down you'd say 15, 20, 25, whatever it was, right? Percentage. And she would look and she would add that tip in and then have to do the math, which she doesn't like math. And so I think that was most of the stress. That is what I remember as stressful about tips in the past, was really people don't like doing math. They feel put on the spot by doing addition and they don't like doing it. And that's okay. That was the stress that we dealt with tipping. Nowadays, it's the stress of, are you seriously asking me for a tip for doing that? Are you seriously asking me a tip? Are you seriously not letting me not tip on this? That is what we're hearing a lot of. And so, what happened? Why is this? Why are we even tipping, right? So let's go through the history a little bit. The US brought tipping over from Europe, of all places. Europe was big on tipping. I didn't really get a chance to research how it started in Europe. I just researched how it started here. Sorry, if you want more information, Google it. That's what I did to get some of this information, right? But it came over in the 1800s, and the US citizens who'd gone to Europe from vacations and different things like that had seen people tip, and they thought that was a great idea to bring to the US. And after the Civil War, there was a flood of people coming into the labor market that needed jobs. And, they didn't have a lot of skills in terms of, they weren't typists or they weren't anything. They had their skills that they had from being slaves. And a lot of employers, unfortunately, took advantage of this. And they said, well, we can pay them a very low wage and allow the customer to make up the difference. And back then there wasn't any minimum wage, right? So they could get away with that. And they did for a very long time until 1938, FDR enacted the Fair Labor Standards Act, and where it had a minimum wage. A minimum wage was set in place with that act, but it excluded certain industries, including restaurants and retail, right? And restaurants in particular have been a very interesting discussion, part of the discussion that's happening nowadays, because, how is a server paid? Well, traditionally how a server was paid, at least in 1996, they had a tipping minimum. So they were a tipping employee or tipped employee. And so the minimum that basically the employer had to pay was $2.13, and then an hour, I should say. And then the server would basically rely on tips to make up the rest of their wage. And this has been going on for a very long time. But now we have the federal minimum wage, the federal mandated minimum wage, I should say. And it's very interesting because it's really kind of put everything on its head. How do you handle this with these tipped employees? And apparently what I was reading, it seems a little messy. There's not really a straightforward answer of how this is being handled since the federal minimum wage is so new still. But apparently what's happening is that the employer is still paying the $2 and some cents. I'm not sure what it was in, like I said, 1996, it was $2.13, but I don't know what it is now. And they would continue to pay that per hour if the employee does not make up to the federal minimum wage hourly rate with their tips. Then the employer is beholden to make up that difference, apparently. So that might be why we're seeing so much push for tips, because the employer is trying to offload some of this extra labor cost onto the consumer. I don't know that for sure. It was just kind of a hunch when I was looking through. That would make sense, as labor is very expensive. You have payroll tax, you have a lot of other things associated with labor, so that might be part of it. Now, what I did find kind of amusing, was there is new terminology around tipping. There is something called guilt tipping that I read a lot about, which is basically societal expectations, and are we seen as, cheap or rude or Ebenezer Scrooge because we don't tip for something, right? Then there's something called tipflation, which is basically consumers feel like they are getting asked to tip everywhere. Like I said, I was reading this Reddit thread, and there were some stories about, people who were being asked to tip, people at a yoga studio for handing them a mat after they paid for the class. There were people that were talking about having to tip at a farmer's market to the person who sold them the fruit that they were buying. I even saw one where it was an auto body shop and they asked for a tip. So it's just kind of all over the place that tips are being asked for. And I guess the biggest question that people have when they're presented with this tip thing, whether if they don't have the option to opt out, I think it gets a little bit more messy. But let's say you do have the option to opt out and you're presented with this. The biggest question I always have, and I think most people have, is who's getting this tip? If somebody has just taken something out of a display case, put in a bag and given it to me for, food, let's say it's a piece of pie or something like that, is that person getting the tip, or is the person who made the food getting the tip? If the person who made the food is getting the tip, then I'm a little bit more inclined to do it, right? But I think there's always that question of who is getting the tip, and you can't really ask that. I mean, it seems kind of rude to be like, are you the one getting the tip, or is that guy back there getting it? Like, you can't do that. But it just seems like, who is getting the tip? Is it actually going to the employees? A lot of people are worried that it's actually going to the owner and the owner's keeping it. I don't know. There's a lot of mistrust going on with this tipping. And so how does this all relate to financial planning? We are going to get that back right now on track, which is, how do you stay on budget when you have to tip everywhere? There's a simple rule that you could do. Let's say you're doing a budget, and you've seen videos. If you haven't, there is a video in the past that I can link below about budgets and whether or not they work or not. But a lot of people do have some kind of budget that they work off of. And, you should probably include tipping in there. If you say you have an eating out budget of, $400 a month, maybe you should add 20% to that. And, that's your budget. If you have different things like miscellaneous entertainment, maybe add 5 or 10% to that, to your budget, to make it all work, so you can see if you're gonna, if you're gonna make it or not, if you're gonna have enough money to pay all your bills and save for what you want. And that kind of strategy can help quite a bit. The other strategy is, having an idea, a set of rules almost, of how you tip, how much you tip, and maybe even a little checklist that you go through. So I know that some people say at restaurants, even if they do stellar service, 20% is what they're getting. There's no 25, there's no 30, it's 20. And that's okay. That's a good tip. I mean, that was the very, very high standards a long time ago, and now that seems like an average tip, but that's still a very good tip in many respects. And you can say, okay, if that's my high of restaurants, what am I going to tip at the ice cream shop or at Starbucks or at blank blank, right? And put a percentage that is your high. So if your high at Starbucks is 10%, that's what you tip them. If your high is, to give $1 to the lady who hands you the yoga mat, then that's your maximum that you're going to do. It takes that emotional strain out of it, and you still feel in control of your money, because realistically, this is your money. You should never feel guilty about how you spend it, as long as you're spending it on legal things and everything like that, of course. But this is your money, and you're allowed to not tip if you don't feel like it. If you just have a steadfast rule that you don't tip for anything outside of, restaurants and, bellhops or something like that, or whatever you decide that you want to have as your rule, then that's your rule. And there's no guilt around that. That's what you've decided is how you do it. And essentially, you can also have kind of an internal little checklist, between 1 and 5. How did they do? Okay, they did a 2. Well, maybe they don't get a tip, right? They did a 5. Great, they get 20% if they're a server at a restaurant. And do you feel like they deserve a tip between 1 and 5? If you feel like the guy who sold you the fruit at the farmer's market doesn't deserve a tip, and you give it a 1 in your brain, don't give him a tip. It's okay. So I think having these little strategies and these little things in place for ourselves to take that emotional strain out of it will help a lot, because I do not see this going away. It's going to be there. It's already here. Just like, prices of groceries, even if inflation goes down, those prices of groceries are not going down, my friends. I'm telling you that. They're going to stay where they're at because people are paying it. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they keep it there? Right? So this is not going away. Having a strategy can help you keep your sanity during this stuff. And having it built into your budget can help as well. As I said, always look at your credit card bills too. Even if you have a budget, look at your credit card bills, because that will really determine, I used to pay $60 when I went to such and such a place, restaurant, and now I'm paying $80. Ooh, that's a lot more. Do I want to continue to go out as much? Maybe I want to order something different. Maybe I don't get a glass of wine with dinner. Maybe, so there are different things, but I think really looking at your credit card statements every week, like I've always said, take a couple minutes and look at it, really allows you to have those internal conversations so that you are in control of your money. And so if you want to be super generous and tip all over the place, just make sure that you're watching what you're spending your money on and make sure you're pulling back in other places. Maybe, you don't need another Amazon purchase or another thing from Instagram. Maybe that can help make up for the difference of tipping, right? You can always, it's a balancing act, right? So essentially, in the long run, do not feel guilty about tipping. The United States is a very, very charitable country. I think this is amazing, this statistic. I put out a short about this, and I got a lot of views because I think it just shows how amazing we are as a country. For those roll up for charity programs that are out there, would you like to take your 31 cents and roll it up for charity? Sure, okay. In those programs in 2022, the U.S. donated $749 million. That's a lot. That is a lot of money to go to charity, and we just rolled up. And so anybody who says that the U.S. is being stingy and that people don't want to give, that's not true. So do not feel guilty about not tipping if you don't feel like it's deserved. Okay, that's the bottom line. So thank you so much for watching this and staying to the end. I would love to hear comments. I want to hear what the silliest thing you've had to tip for is. I want to hear your feelings about tipping. Maybe you're pro tipping everybody, maybe you're not. Maybe it makes you really emotional. Maybe it makes you feel anxious. I want to hear everything. Let's start a discussion. Please leave some comments below. That would be wonderful. And the next video is going to be a very anxious ridden one as well. You know, it's the way I work. So it's going to be investing in an uncertain economy, because things are uncertain right now. They're talking about recession again. The Fed's not lowering rates like they said they would. Inflation seems to be going back up. Gas is going through the roof again. Like, is this a time that you want to invest? Are we heading for a recession? What does that mean for the markets? So let's discuss that in the next video, and let's get you on the right track to financial independence. I'll see you next time.